My name is Elara Wynn, and I've done something people will never understand. I let my horse play with me all night. When I said those words on camera for the first time, under the harsh glow of my barn's single light bulb, the internet exploded. Thousands of comments, millions of views. Some laughed, some gasped, and some whispered things I wish they hadn't. But none of them knew what really happened that night. None of them knew what I meant by play, because it wasn't a game. It was survival, and maybe it was love, the kind that saves you when no human hand can. I grew up on the edge of nowhere, a place where silence was louder than people. The land around our ranch stretched endlessly, golden in summer, silver in winter, unforgiving always. My father used to say that horses were born knowing more about honesty than humans ever will. I didn't believe him until I met Ashfire. He wasn't mine at first. He belonged to the wild hills, a dark bay stallion with a streak of fire down his nose, like the ashes of a dying star had burned into his skin. The locals called him cursed, said he broke fences, injured trainers, and refused the bit every single time. But when I first saw him, mud-splattered, eyes like molten amber locked on mine, I saw something else. I saw pain. The kind I knew too well. A year earlier, I'd lost everything that made me feel human. My father died in a riding accident, the kind you never see coming. One second he was laughing, the next he was gone. I'd sworn never to ride again. I sold every horse except one, a quiet mare named June, but even she faded from me. I couldn't stand the smell of hay, the creak of leather, the whisper of hooves on dirt. Then came Ashfire. He was brought to the ranch by a rescue group after nearly being put down for untrainable aggression. The day he arrived, I stood by the paddock watching as two men tried to unload him. He kicked, reared, screamed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. And yet behind the rage, there was terror. I knew that feeling too. The desperate fight not to be hurt again. When his gaze found mine through the dust and chaos, something shifted. Not peace, not understanding, just awareness, like two broken things recognizing each other. That first week, no one could get close to him. He smashed stall doors, bit through ropes, and refused to eat when anyone watched. But I kept coming back. I'd sit outside his stall every night after everyone went home, reading aloud to him from my father's old books. My voice would tremble at first, but eventually it steadied. And one night, as I read The Old Man and the Sea, he stepped closer, just close enough for his breath to fog against the bars. That was the first time I didn't feel alone since the funeral. Months passed. Slowly he began to trust me. He'd let me brush him, feed him from my hand, and on rare mornings, follow me out to the pasture without a lead. But still, there was a line I couldn't cross. He would not let anyone ride him. The moment a saddle appeared, he became a storm. And I, coward that I was, didn't dare try. Until that night. It was late autumn, the kind of cold that crawls under your skin and settles in your bones. The wind howled over the hills like a warning, and the barn creaked under its breath. I couldn't sleep. The memories of my father's fall haunted me. His scream, the silence afterward, the smell of wet earth. So I went to the barn, like I always did when the ghosts got too loud. Ashfire stood at the far end of his stall, restless, tail flicking, ears alert. The storm outside was making him nervous. Lightning flashed, and he snorted, muscles quivering. "It's okay," I whispered. "It's just noise." But he didn't calm down. The next thunderclap was so close it shook the rafters. He reared, slamming his hooves against the door. Instinct took over. I unlatched it, trying to soothe him before he hurt himself. The moment the door swung open, he bolted. I ran after him into the night. The world was a blur of rain and mud. The wind tore at my jacket as I stumbled across the pasture, shouting his name. Lightning carved the sky open, revealing his dark shape galloping toward the tree line. "Ashfire, stop!" I screamed. But you can't stop a storm with words. My boots sank into the sodden ground. The air smelled of ozone and fear. Somewhere in the darkness I heard a crash, a fence breaking. Then silence. I found him tangled in the broken boards, his flank bleeding from a jagged edge. He was trembling, nostrils flaring, eyes wild with pain. I approached slowly. whispering his name again and again like a prayer. "It's me. It's Elara. I've got you. I've got you." For a moment he almost struck out, but then his gaze softened. He let me come close, let me touch him. My hands shook as I freed his leg, ignoring the blood that smeared across my palms. When he finally stood, I could see he was hurt, but not broken. The rain poured harder now, drumming against us, washing the blood and fear away. There was no way we could make it back to the barn through the mud and wind. We needed shelter. I remembered the old equipment shed near the north field, a place I hadn't stepped into since my father died. That was where his last saddle still hung, and so, shivering, half crying, I led Ashfire there through the storm. Inside, the shed smelled of dust and ghosts. The roof leaked in places, and the wind moaned through the cracks. I spread out an old tarp on the ground and coaxed him to stand beside me. His sides heaved, his breath steaming in the cold air. I sank down beside him, exhausted. That's when it happened. He lowered his head, slowly, cautiously, and pressed his muzzle against my shoulder. It was a small thing, but it felt like the world holding me up for the first time in years. His warmth seeped through my soaked clothes. I leaned into him, my tears mixing with rain, and there, in that broken shed, in the middle of the storm, I laughed. It sounded wrong, almost hysterical, but I couldn't stop. Because somehow, in that moment, I realized we'd both been running. From fear, from pain, from loss. And now we had nowhere left to go but here. So we stayed. All night. He would nudge me when the thunder got too close. And I would whisper back to him, stories and songs I barely remembered. When the roof groaned and leaked, he'd shift closer, shielding me from the cold. We didn't sleep much, but it didn't matter. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the dark. That's what I meant when I said I let my horse play with me all night. He played with my fear, my grief, my loneliness, and somehow turned them into peace. By dawn, the storm had passed. The sky burned pink and gold over the hills. I stood outside the shed, drenched and shaking, watching Ashfire graze beside me as if nothing had happened. But something had. He followed me back to the barn without a rope. When I opened the tack room and looked at my father's old saddle, my chest tightened. For the first time in a year, the thought of riding didn't hurt. I turned to Ashfire. He lifted his head, ears flicking forward. "Not yet," I whispered. "But soon," he snorted softly, as if agreeing. That morning, as the sun rose over the wet fields, I knew the storm had taken something from both of us and left something better in its place. It wasn't just a night in the rain. It was the night I stopped running. People online will never understand. They'll see the title, "I Let My Horse Play With Me All Night," and they'll assume things, laugh, make jokes. But I don't mind, because the truth is far more powerful than anything they can imagine. Sometimes the wildest souls don't need to be tamed. They just need someone willing to stand beside them in the storm. And that night, I finally learned how. The morning after the storm, the world felt different. The air was crisp, almost electric, as though the night's chaos had rewritten everything. I remember staring at Ashfire across the pasture, the sun glinting off his dark coat, the streak of fire on his nose glowing like an ember in the early light. He grazed calmly, but every now and then, he flicked an ear toward me, watching. He trusted me now, but only just. The balance between him and me was delicate, like standing on a tightrope in a gusting wind. One false move, one mistake, and it could all collapse. I had never felt more alive. I spent the morning cleaning the mud from his legs, carefully tending the cuts he had sustained. My hands were still red from rain and blood, but there was no rush. For once I wasn't alone with my grief. Ashfire's presence grounded me. Every exhale he released, every nicker, felt like reassurance that I wasn't completely lost. The world outside the pasture could wait, and yet it wouldn't. By midday, my phone buzzed constantly. The video from the night before had gone viral. Millions of views, endless comments, half mocking, half genuinely impressed. People speculated wildly about what play meant. I didn't bother reading most of it, but a few lines made my stomach tighten. People had no idea. They would never know that this play was trust, survival, and the rawest form of companionship I had ever experienced. Still, there was a thrill in it. Suddenly, Ashfire and I weren't just two lost souls in a forgotten pasture. We were something else. A story. A legend in the making, at least in the eyes of strangers scrolling through screens. I shoved my phone in my pocket and focused on him. We began with small steps, literally. I walked beside him, letting him guide me around the field, a halter on his head and no lead rope. At first he tested me, darting toward the fence, skidding on the wet grass, glancing at me to see if I'd panic. I didn't. I held my ground. He let out a long sigh, almost human in its relief, and slowed his pace. "That's it, Ash," I murmured. "Just us." By the time the sun dipped low over the hills, he followed me as if we'd been doing this for years. And that was the point when I realized the night of the storm hadn't just been a test for him. It had been a test for me. Could I hold steady? Could I be calm when everything around me was chaos? I had passed, and that was the first step toward the next, far more terrifying challenge. I had never planned to ride him. Not really, not after my father's death. Not after my self-imposed exile from horses, but watching him move with that combination of power and caution. I felt something stir deep in my chest, a longing I hadn't acknowledged. He was ready, I thought. He trusted me enough now. But I wasn't ready, not entirely. And that's what made the moment electric. I led him back to the barn slowly, talking to him, letting him sniff the saddle that I hadn't touched in months. He circled it warily, nostrils flaring. My heartbeat matched his, fast and anxious, every muscle tight. "Okay," I whispered. "We can try this. One step, that's all." The first attempt was awkward. I tried mounting him from the left, but he shied at the sound of my boots against the stirrup. I froze, waiting for him to react, willing him to calm down. For long seconds, we just stared at each other, a storm of anticipation between us. Then slowly, he stepped back. I took a breath. "Again," I said softly. And this time, I approached differently, keeping my movements slow and deliberate, letting him see and feel that I wasn't a threat. When my leg swung over, his flinch was minor. My body pressed against his side, feeling the heat of his muscles, the rhythm of his heartbeat. My own hands gripped the saddle tightly. He moved. Just a step, then another, and with each step my confidence grew. I whispered encouragement, my voice low and steady. His ears flicked back to me repeatedly, almost as if he were asking, "Are you sure?" "Yes, Ash," I said, gripping tighter. "I'm sure." The ride was slow, tentative, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. I had forgotten what it meant to feel fully alive in one moment. The wind brushed across my face, mingling with the scent of wet earth and hay, and I laughed, a sound full of disbelief and triumph. Ashfire responded, tossing his head gently, ears forward, as if sharing in my joy. We weren't riding yet, not truly. Not in the sense that people expect when they see a horse and rider in perfect sync. This was learning to trust riding, a dance between fear and courage, between past and present. Every nerve in my body screamed in exhilaration, but I held on, and Ashfire, Ashfire, moved with the grace and power of a creature that knew the world but had never been tamed, except by the small trembling human clinging to him. Word of the video spread. The comments had multiplied overnight, and now the world wanted answers. Friends called. My neighbors stopped by, eyes wide with curiosity, disbelief, even judgment. People wondered how I could possibly be safe, how I could dare approach a horse like that. But here's the truth. I wasn't brave. Not really, not at first. I was desperate, and sometimes desperation leads you to do the things fear whispers you cannot. That night, I returned to the shed, the same one that had sheltered us during the storm. Ashfire nuzzled me immediately, as though sensing my exhaustion and trepidation. We had tried mounting him in the field, but the uneven, wet ground had made him nervous. Now, in the shed's relative safety, I attempted it again. This time, he stood perfectly still. My hands shook as I swung my leg over, but he didn't flinch. I lowered myself gently, feeling the solid warmth of his back beneath me. He exhaled slowly, rhythmically. I realized then that he had given me a gift. Trust. It wasn't blind. It wasn't permanent. But it was there, a fragile, glowing thread between us. We stayed in the shed for hours, moving in circles, walking, trotting, and sometimes just standing, breathing together. The rain from earlier had left puddles on the roof, and the sound of water dripping around us became a lullaby of sorts. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his neck, listening to his heartbeat. I could feel the raw, unfiltered connection between us, stronger than words. My hands rested lightly on his mane. Every now and then, he nudged me with his nose, a reminder that he was alive, and here, and he needed me as much as I needed him. And in that moment, I understood the truth behind my clickbait title. I hadn't let him play with me. We had played together. Through the night, we danced in silence and whispers, exploring boundaries, discovering courage, and letting go of everything that had haunted us for months. Ashfire had become not just a horse, but a mirror of my own resilience, a companion in darkness, a living proof that fear could be overcome when trust existed. By dawn, exhaustion had settled over me like a heavy blanket. I slid off Ashfire's back gently, letting him shake himself, his muscles rippling in the morning light. He nuzzled my shoulder one last time before stepping outside. I followed, barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, watching him graze, his confidence growing with each step. The world seemed larger now, possibilities stretching beyond the hills and pastures that had confined me. For the first time since my father's death, I felt capable of facing life again. Ashfire had taught me that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. And as I returned to the barn, muddy and soaked but alive in a way I hadn't been for years, I knew the night had changed everything. Not just for him, not just for me, but for both of us. People online would continue to speculate, misunderstand, and gossip. They would never know the quiet battles fought in rain and darkness, the small victories, the courage that had been summoned in whispers and heartbeats. But that was fine, because some stories don't need validation. Some truths exist only in the bond shared between a girl and her horse and ours. It was just beginning. The night crept over the hills like a velvet curtain, thick and endless. The moon struggled to pierce through the clouds, casting the pasture in ghostly shades of silver and black. I had always feared the night. Darkness carried memories, shadows, the whispers of loss. But tonight, darkness felt different. It felt alive, expectant. It called to me, and Ashfire seemed to feel it too. We had spent the day preparing. I had carefully packed a small saddlebag with water, a blanket, and some of the treats Ashfire liked. My boots were muddy but sturdy, and my jacket smelled faintly of hay and rain. I could hear the wind whispering through the old barn's beams as I ran my hand along Ashfire's neck. His coat was damp, slick from the evening's mist. His muscles coiled under my palm like springs ready to release. I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Ready for an adventure?" He nickered softly, the sound vibrating through his throat, a reassurance. He trusted me completely, and yet, I felt that familiar flutter of anxiety. The pasture was safe. The barn was safe. But beyond those fences lay the hills, the forests, the unknown. And tonight, I would step into it. The first steps were tentative. Ashfire's hooves sank slightly into the damp earth, the smell of wet grass and soil rising with every stride. I kept my weight balanced, heart hammering, eyes scanning the shadowed horizon. Every snapping branch, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt through me. The world was alive in ways I hadn't noticed during daylight. And I realized that being out here alone, just him and me, was a test, not of skill, but of courage. We followed the old trail behind the northern hill, a path my father had shown me once long ago. I remembered the way he had laughed when I stumbled on a rock, brushing dirt from my hands. I remembered the smell of leather, the tang of sweat on a summer afternoon. I could almost hear him whispering from the shadows of memory. Trust him. Trust yourself. Ashfire moved ahead, ears pricked, nose twitching at the scents carried by the wind. I could feel his tension, the slight tightening of his muscles whenever the trail curved into the darker woods. I whispered to him constantly, my voice low, steady. "You're safe. We're together." And for the first time, I realized something. This night wasn't about escaping fear. It was about facing it. Together, the forest thickened. Trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Shadows danced in the moonlight, and every snap of twig or rustle of leaves echoed like thunder. Ashfire shifted beneath me, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold, a low growl, not far, somewhere deeper in the trees. A warning, or a challenge. I froze, heart pounding. Ashfire stiffened beneath me, muscles taut. He didn't bolt, not yet, but he was ready. I ran my hand along his neck, trying to calm myself as much as him. "It's okay," I whispered. "We're okay." The sound repeated, closer this time, and I realized it wasn't a single animal. Something moved in the underbrush, circling us, testing. My mind raced with possibilities. Wild dogs, raccoons, maybe a deer startled by our presence. But my instincts told me there was danger. Real danger. Ashfire's ears twitched forward, his eyes wide and alert. I leaned closer, voice steady, even as my chest threatened to explode with panic. "Follow me," I murmured. Careful steps. Step by step, we advanced, the ground slick with moss and wet leaves. Ashfire's hooves made soft impressions, but he moved with a confidence I envied. He trusted me, and that trust became a lifeline. Every rustle, every shadow I had to decide instantly, threat or no threat. And every time Ashfire's intuition guided me. A pair of glowing eyes blinked at us from the shadows. I held my breath. The animal stepped forward. A fox, small and timid, scuttling away at the first sound of our movement. I exhaled, relief flooding me. But the adrenaline stayed, sharp and alive, buzzing through my veins. We reached the top of the hill, and the world unfolded below us in rolling fields and forests, silvered by the pale moonlight. I slid off Ashfire's back for a moment, resting my hands on his warm coat. He lowered his head, nuzzling my shoulder, and I leaned into him, letting the tension of hours melt away. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I whispered. He didn't answer with words, but with a soft nicker, a gesture that somehow felt like agreement. It was tempting to stay, to let the night cradle us forever. But there was more to explore. The forest had more stories, more shadows, and I wanted to see them all. As we moved forward again, the wind shifted, the scent of rain, damp earth, and something else, something wild, filled the air. Ashfire stiffened. I felt it too, the prickling sensation of unseen eyes following us. And then it happened. A branch snapped, sharp and sudden, right to our left. Ashfire jerked instinctively, nearly throwing me off balance. I clung to him, heart hammering. "What is it?" I whispered, though the answer didn't come. Then came a low, rhythmic growl, closer this time. The shadows moved. I realized the night was testing us, testing our courage, our bond. I could feel Ashfire beneath me, muscles coiled like springs, ready to react. And I did the only thing I could. I stayed calm, even as my body trembled. "Look at me," I murmured. "We're together. We're okay." And somehow, that was enough. The creatures, or whatever they were, retreated. The forest returned to its quiet murmur, leaves rustling softly in the wind. My legs shook, my palms were slick with sweat, but I had stayed upright. And Ashfire, sensing my steadiness, relaxed. For a long moment, we simply stood there, two silhouettes in the moonlight, heartbeats echoing in the dark. It was exhilarating, terrifying, beautiful. We continued our ride deeper into the forest, following the winding path that seemed to appear only for us. The night grew colder, the shadows denser. Every sound became amplified. The drip of water from leaves, the rustle of undergrowth, the distant call of an owl. Each step demanded vigilance. Each step demanded trust. Ashfire moved like a shadow himself, silent and deliberate. And I realized something vital. We weren't just moving through the forest. We were moving through fear itself, and fear was yielding under our combined courage. At some point, the trail opened into a small clearing. Moonlight poured down like silver rain. Ashfire snorted, nostrils flaring, and I felt the pulse of life in him, pure, untamed, and magnificent. I slid off his back, walking beside him, letting him graze on the sparse grass. I took out a small blanket, draping it over my shoulders. The wind tugged at it, cold and sharp, but I didn't care. I felt alive in a way that only comes from facing danger and surviving it. I scratched behind Ashfire's ears, whispering soothing words. He leaned into my touch, and I understood something deeper than any word could express. This wasn't just trust. This was communion, two souls connecting, bound by the night, the storm, and the wild unknown. Hours passed. We didn't see another creature, didn't hear another threat, but the forest had changed us. By the time we made our way back to the barn, my hands were blistered, my muscles screaming, and my heart was still racing. Ashfire moved with a grace that was hypnotic. Ears forward, muscles rippling, yet attentive to every subtle cue I gave. We arrived at the barn just as the first hints of dawn painted the sky in pink and gold. Exhausted, I slid off his back and collapsed against him. He nuzzled me gently, as if to say, "You survived." "We survived," I whispered back, voice hoarse. "Yes, together." The night had tested us, pushed us to the edge of fear and courage, and we had survived, not just as horse and rider, but as partners, as equals, as friends bound by trust that went deeper than any words or gestures could capture. People online would continue to speculate about our story. They would never know about the shadows, the growls, the adrenaline that made my stomach twist and my palms sweat. They wouldn't know how Ashfire's presence had anchored me when fear threatened to swallow me whole. But I did. I knew. And that knowledge was ours alone, a secret shared in the wild night, under the gaze of the moon, in the whispering trees. And somehow, I knew that this was only the beginning. The night arrived silently, almost deceptively calm. The sky above the hills was a blanket of deep indigo, dotted with stars, and the moon hung low, casting pale light across the barn and pasture. I should have felt comfort in its quiet beauty. Instead, my stomach churned with unease. There was something in the air, electric, tense, a promise of challenge waiting to unfold. Ashfire sensed it too. His ears twitched, tail flicking nervously, nostrils flaring. I approached him slowly, hands raised, speaking softly, trying to project the calm I didn't entirely feel. "Ready for another adventure?" I asked, though my voice betrayed a tremor. He snorted, a sound that was half amusement, half warning. The plan was simple, a night ride to the old river trail. A place my father had taken me countless times, where shadows twisted between trees and the water whispered over stones. I had done it before during daylight, but tonight was different. The air felt heavier, charged, almost alive. Every sound seemed amplified. The rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl, the soft splatter of water droplets from the roof of the barn. I mounted Ashfire, feeling the familiar warmth of his muscles under me, the steady pulse of life that made me feel tethered to the world. He moved beneath me with cautious grace, hooves sinking into the soft earth. We left the barn behind, moving into the dark, silent fields. The forest swallowed us quickly. Shadows bent and stretched across the path, twisting in the corners of my vision. Ashfire's ears swiveled constantly, tracking noises I couldn't even identify. My grip on the reins was firm but gentle. I let him lead when he hesitated, and he trusted me to follow when I directed. Then I heard it. A faint, irregular snapping of branches. A soft crunch behind us, deliberate. My heart stuttered. Ashfire stiffened beneath me, muscles coiling like springs. I whispered to him, "It's okay. We're okay. Stay calm." But neither of us truly believed it. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, circling us like a predator playing with its prey. I tried to peer into the darkness, straining to see through the thick shadows of trees. Then I caught movement, two glowing eyes low to the ground, shifting in the underbrush. My breath caught. Ashfire snorted sharply and took a step forward, positioning himself between me and whatever lurked in the shadows. I clutched the reins tightly, trying to steady my shaking hands. "Easy," I murmured. "Easy, Ashfire. Just keep moving." We moved cautiously, one step at a time, following the faint trail toward the river. The eyes followed us, and with each step, my fear climbed. My imagination conjured monsters, wild dogs, even wolves. But I knew instinctively that it was not just fear, it was a test. And Ashfire was ready to face it. We reached the edge of the river, where moonlight spilled across the water, silver and deceptively calm. Ashfire paused, sensing the unstable footing near the bank. The ground was slick with mud, the stones hidden beneath shallow water. I leaned forward, whispering encouragements, stroking his neck. Suddenly, there was a splash, a large, sudden movement from the water. Ashfire jumped, hooves skidding, and I nearly fell forward. "Steady! Steady!" I shouted, gripping the reins. A deer had darted across the river, startled by our presence. It leapt gracefully over a fallen log and disappeared into the darkness. Ashfire exhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, and I let out a shaky laugh of relief. But the night had already carved its mark into my nerves. We continued along the trail, moving deeper into the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl made me tense. I realized I was relying not only on Ashfire's instincts, but also on the bond we had forged. The unspoken trust that had grown from nights spent together, from storms weathered, from shared fear. Then came the true test. A fallen tree blocked the path, its massive trunk spanning the trail. The forest on either side was dense, brambles and roots twisting into barriers. Ashfire stopped abruptly, snorting, muscles taut. I could feel his hesitation as clearly as if it were my own. I dismounted carefully, standing beside him. The tree was too high and wide to jump, even for him. And yet, I felt something in the air, a whisper of possibility, the challenge of danger. I ran my hand along his neck. "We can do this. Together." He nuzzled my shoulder gently, a silent promise. We circled the fallen tree, searching for a safe path. The underbrush snagged at my boots, tearing at my jacket, and I could hear twigs snapping behind us. My nerves screamed for me to turn back, but Ashfire remained calm, his body poised for action. I led him along a narrow detour, balancing on slick stones and loose soil. The trail narrowed dangerously, roots threatening to trip us, the river rushing nearby like a warning. One wrong step, and we could slide into the water, or worse. Ashfire's hooves slipped once too close to the edge. I felt the terror spike, a cold surge that made my stomach clench. I gripped the saddle tightly, leaning forward to stabilize him. His muscles tensed under my hands, then released, and we moved again, inch by inch, careful and deliberate. Halfway along the precarious path, another danger emerged. From the shadows ahead, a large branch broke and fell with a loud crack. Ashfire bolted instinctively, heart hammering, eyes wide with alarm. I clung desperately, yelling his name, trying to regain control. For a moment, the world spun. The river roared beneath us. Trees loomed like dark towers, and my mind screamed at me to jump off. But I didn't. I couldn't. Ashfire was not just a horse tonight. He was my anchor, my companion, my lifeline. I held steady, leaning with him, guiding him back to the center of the path. Slowly, methodically, we regained control. My heart pounded in my chest, breath ragged, but Ashfire exhaled a long, slow snort, easing the tension between us. We finally reached a safer clearing near the riverbank. The night had tested us in every way possible. Darkness, wild animals, treacherous terrain. And yet we had survived. I slid off Ashfire's back, sinking to my knees beside him, hands resting on his warm coat. He lowered his head, pressing it gently against me, and I buried my face in his mane. "You saved us," I whispered. "We saved each other." He nuzzled me in return, soft and grounding. And I realized something crucial. The night had not broken us. It had forged us stronger. Hours passed, and the forest gradually calmed. The moon slid behind clouds, and the first hints of dawn crept into the sky. Ashfire grazed quietly, ears flicking at distant sounds, alert but calm. I sat beside him, exhausted, muscles sore, yet more alive than I had felt in years. That night had been more than an adventure. It had been a crucible. Every fear I had carried, every hesitation, every doubt about myself and my courage had been tested. And we had passed. Together. By the time we returned to the barn, the sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold. I dismounted carefully, brushing Ashfire down, talking to him in the low, steady voice I had learned to trust. He nuzzled me one last time before stepping into his stall, calm now, The tension of the night dissipated. I stood outside the stall, breathing heavily, watching the first light of day illuminate the wet earth, the broken branches, the traces of our midnight journey. People online would continue to speculate, to mock, to misunderstand. But I didn't care. This night was ours alone. Ashfire and I had faced fear, chaos, and danger, and emerged stronger, connected in a way no one could ever fully understand. And as I leaned against the barn door, watching the mist rise from the pasture, I knew that the final chapter of our journey was approaching. Something bigger, something even more daring awaited us, because the bond we had forged in darkness, trust, and danger was unbreakable, and we were ready for whatever came next. The morning light spilled over the pasture in soft shades of gold and amber. The world seemed to hold its breath, suspended between night and day. I sat on the fence, watching Ashfire graze, his coat glistening with dew, his muscles rippling with quiet power. After everything, the storm, the dark trails, the unknown creatures in the forest, we had survived. Together, I let out a long, shaky breath, feeling the weight of exhaustion and exhilaration settle over me. My body ached, my hands were raw from gripping reins, and yet I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Ashfire had changed me. I remember the first time I met him, a wild, untamed spirit no one could approach. Back then, I had been broken too, afraid to face the world, afraid to ride again, afraid to trust. But the nights we had shared, the storm, the river, the forest, had transformed us both. Now he was not just my horse. He was my mirror, my companion, my constant in a world that had once felt unsteady and cruel. And in a strange, thrilling way, the bond between us was more than the physical connection of reins and hooves. It was something raw, something powerful, a language of trust and understanding that needed no words. That morning I saddled him one last time. The sun warmed my back, and the mist swirled around our hooves. I climbed into the saddle, feeling the familiar pulse of his heart beneath me. We moved slowly at first, testing the rhythm of each other's steps. And then, gradually, we broke into a trot, the soft thud of his hooves against the damp earth syncing perfectly with my racing heartbeat. I laughed aloud, the sound carrying across the hills. Ashfire tossed his head, ears forward, and it felt like we were sharing some secret joy, the kind that only comes from surviving fear together. We rode across the pasture, across the hills, the wind tearing through our hair. Every stride was freedom, every heartbeat a reminder that we had come this far. And yet, in the back of my mind, a thrill lingered, a promise of more adventures, more nights where the dark could test us, more moments where the bond between human and horse would be pushed to its limits. I glanced at Ashfire, his eyes glowing with intelligence and quiet mischief. I could almost hear him saying, "We're not done yet." When we reached the edge of the forest, I stopped. The trees stretched into shadowed depths, and a gentle wind whispered through the branches. I slid off his back, resting my hands on his warm coat. Ashfire lowered his head, nudging me softly. "Not the end," I whispered. "Just not the end yet," he snorted softly as if agreeing. I could feel the unspoken understanding between us, the kind of connection that only comes from shared danger and trust. And then I noticed something, a glimmer of movement in the shadows. Something small, delicate, and quick. A fox, perhaps? A deer? Maybe. But Ashfire's ears twitched sharply, and he shifted, muscles coiled with readiness. I laughed softly, a mixture of excitement and relief. The night isn't done testing us, I thought, and I wouldn't have it any other way. As we rode back toward the barn, the sun climbing higher, the wind at our backs, I felt a sense of completeness. The trials of the storm, the river, the forest, all of it had led to this. The bond we had forged was stronger than fear, stronger than night, stronger than any obstacle. And yet, in the thrill of the ride, in the warmth of his presence, I felt a spark of anticipation. Something told me that the world wasn't finished with us, that more adventures awaited, that more nights, more challenges, more heart-stopping moments of trust were coming. We reached the barn just as the first light of dawn touched the roof. Ashfire lowered his head, grazing gently, and I slid from the saddle. I leaned against him, feeling his warmth, the steady pulse of his heart, the softness of his muzzle against my shoulder. "You've changed everything," I whispered. "We've changed everything. Together." He snorted softly, nudging me one last time before I stepped back. I took a deep breath, savoring the quiet, the calm, the victory. The night was over. The trials were over, and yet there was a thrill in the unknown still lingering, a pull toward what might come next. I reached for the reins again, almost instinctively, and Ashfire stepped closer, ears pricked, eyes alert. "Ready?" I asked, smiling. He tossed his head, mane flowing, and I felt the familiar surge of excitement. The same feeling I had felt during the storm, on the river trail, in the dark forest. It was the promise of the next night, the next adventure, the next test. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. Because whatever came next, we would face it together. And as the sun rose fully, warming the pasture, I knew this much was certain. Some nights aren't meant to end. Some bonds aren't meant to be broken. And some adventures, like the ones shared between a girl and her horse, are only just beginning. The forest waits. The hills whisper. And I have a feeling Ashfire and I aren't done yet.